Fantastic. Thank you so much. I wish I could be with you and see you all and build relationship with you. It's really hard talking to a green light on a camera, but never mind, it's the best we can do. The world we live in is a scary place. It's been said that the fear of the unknown is the strongest kind of fear. None of us here know what tomorrow is going to bring. Not one of us. Now, my family and I moved to Asia back in 2002 to work. We lived in northwest China, living up on the Tibetan plateau, which sounds pretty incredible, but it's very cold and pretty remote. Here's a quick picture of us back then with some Chinese friends and when our kids were a lot younger. One of the joys of living in China, apart from the awesome food, is that every year we had to go to Thailand for a conference. What a hardship. Followed every year by a holiday. Because you're in Thailand, you might as well take advantage of the beautiful beaches and the islands to go on holiday with. So we would always go, fortunately for us, in late January near Chinese New Year. Why fortunately? Well, on Boxing Day, 2004, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake, one of the largest ever recorded, ripped through an undersea fault in the Indian Ocean, propelling a massive column of water towards unsuspecting shores in Thailand, in India, and throughout Indonesia. The Boxing Day tsunami would be the deadliest in recorded history, with a staggering 230,000 lives gone in a matter of hours. It strikes me that people who were celebrating Christmas Day the day before had absolutely no idea what was coming in the morning. Part of my job in China back then, I was looking after a large team of expats. Some of these guys lived in the city of Chengdu in central China. In the afternoon of May the 12th, 2008, a magnitude 8.0 earthquake struck beneath a mountainous region close to Chengdu, toppling buildings and sending landslides crashing into cities. That date is now burned indelibly on the minds of hundreds of thousands of Chinese people because more than 90,000 people died. But on the morning of the 12th of May, when they got up, no one knew what was coming. The future is really uncertain at a macro level, isn't it? But even down more close and personal, at a real personal level, we all know this to be true. Many of us on this call will likely have faced personal loss, or at least have stories of friends or family members who've maybe received a shock diagnosis of serious illness or are involved in a sudden life-changing accident. You've only got to watch the news each night to see that bad stuff happens all the time, and pretty much none of it is expected. This time last year, we'd only just heard of the coronavirus, hadn't we? And all our attempts at preparing for pandemics, being ready for the unexpected future, have been revealed to be completely ineffective. Nearly 2.5 million people across the world have died. And COVID has dramatically affected all of our lives. I don't need to tell you guys that. All of our experiences this year have not been what we expected. And not least the challenge to us in our mental health. There was a poll done recently in the States, and it discovered that 53% of adults reported that their mental health has been negatively impacted due to the worry and stress over COVID. Many adults also report real difficulties sleeping or overeating. There's a huge increase in alcohol consumption or substance abuse, and chronic conditions are worsening. People are fearing going to hospital. The worry and the stress over the coronavirus pandemic has affected us all, and it was completely unpredictable. So the question we're looking at tonight is this: given the unpredictability of the future, is it possible to feel secure in a world of unknowns? Well, I wonder first up how you would define the word secure. So I've got 3 definitions for you, and I want to do an online poll to discover which of these 3 definitions best defines how you mainly react when you hear the word security. So the first one is to be fixed or fastened so as not to become loose or be lost. The second is feeling safe and unthreatened. And the third is feeling confident and free from fear or anxiety. All true definitions, but which one resonates most with you? Go online now and let's have this poll and find out. Are you voting for number 1, being fixed or fastened? You know, usually we think of securing a shelf to the wall or securing your bike to the roof of a car, fixed and fastened. Or do you vote for the second one, where you might think of your personal physical security, feeling safe and unthreatened? Or do you vote for the third one, feeling confident, free from fear or anxiety, which is very much about the state of our mind? What do we think? How are we doing? Wow, look at the top one. Already 56% of people feeling confident and free from fear or anxiety. That's by far the largest one. And that was what I was going to predict, to be honest. I wrote down on my notes, I'm expecting that that third one is the one that we're most going to relate to in the current days that we're facing, when all of our minds are filled with anxieties about our health, our course, our exams, our career, our elderly relatives, our debt, our job prospects. We are all feeling insecure. Now, you can go back to the main screen now, thanks, Jamie. Every culture and religious tradition struggles to deal with the question of the apparent randomness of future events. Why does bad stuff happen? And how on earth can I feel secure knowing that bad stuff could be just around the corner? Well, some people, when you ask them, they just kind of believe in fate. You know, que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. You just don't know what's coming, and there's nothing you can do about it. So what's the point in worrying? It's a very common worldview. And actually, it might be really easy to say, but it gives you absolutely no comfort. The idea of random, meaningless future events is terrifying. What else is there? Well, some people have this kind of karmic understanding, some sort of causality. You know, bad stuff happens because of something that I've done, either in this life or in the past life. And the bad stuff is the consequence of that. So the only way to feel secure is to do loads of good stuff and try and get my karmic balance in order. But the trouble with this is that it's also not particularly comforting, especially if you've got no idea what your past life was like. But not just that, it also seems to be experientially untrue, because we often observe that bad things seem to happen sometimes to good people, and good things often seem to happen to bad people. It doesn't seem fair, it seems random. Well, maybe you're not either of those viewpoints. Maybe you're an absolute materialist, a naturalist. Maybe you kind of lean towards atheism. And the only answers that you can logically have to this question is that this bad stuff is either a consequence of our evolutionary struggle, you know, the survival of the fittest, or it's just the randomness of an uncaring, impersonal universe, which is Dawkins' position. So again, you're left with no comfort at all and plenty to fear. Is there another way? Is there another answer? Is there an answer to feeling secure in the face of an unknown future? Well, obviously, you know, I'm going to say yes, absolutely. As a Christian, absolutely there is. And the answer comes in knowing God and being able to entrust your unknown future into the hands of a loving and all-knowing God. Now, I admit If it's the first time you're hearing this, it's an answer that's going to raise all sorts of additional questions. Lots of common questions come out about the goodness of a God who seems to allow such suffering, or the power of this God who seems not to intervene. These are great questions. These are ancient questions. And we're going to explore some of these questions over these next 2 weeks. But let me just start our weeks off by saying this. Whatever you currently think about the existence of God, if he doesn't actually exist, you're still left with an intellectual problem about the unpredictability of the future and the evil and suffering that is making you feel so insecure. And your current worldview has got no satisfactory answer, no comforting answer. And I want to declare to you, every one of you out there this evening, the future is not random, but it is known and in some senses planned by God. This is the teaching of Christianity. God is outside of time and he sees the end from the beginning, so nothing is hidden from his sight. God is perfectly good, and his purposes for you and me and all of humanity are also good. He knows the future, and he's able to work all things together for the good of those who know him. There was a famous Dutch lady back in the Second World War called Corrie ten Boom. She was an amazing lady. She rescued with her family many Jewish people from being persecuted in the Holocaust. And she wrote these words: "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Now, as I say, this idea is going to raise many questions, but let me just declare that the key to being secure in life comes from knowing God. And we're going to look at this subject later in this next fortnight, about how can I know God? But look, a life knowing this God provides us with security according to each of those three definitions that we looked at earlier. You can, by knowing God, feel confident and be free from anxiety. You can, knowing God, feel safe and unthreatened. And you can even, knowing God, feel fixed or fastened, as in having it all together, being stable, having a solid foundation. But trusting your unknown future to an unknown God does not lead to any security whatsoever. So how do we find out about this God? How do we know God? Well, that's what event weeks are all about. With all the big questions that you've got, I want to challenge you to commit yourself to attending all these amazing events that are being put on. Bring your hardest questions. Come and grill the Christian. Come and ask all the things that you think disprove Christianity. Come and explore the claims of this faith. Because after all, what have you got to lose? But you've got everything to gain if by the end of the fortnight you really have come to know this God. Because to be secure, we genuinely need to know this God. We need to know his purposes for us. And critically, we need to know the comfort of his presence in our daily lives. And it's that last point that I want to end with tonight, because it's this point that sets Christianity apart from all other possible answers to the problem of the unknown tomorrow. Because Christianity uniquely teaches that God himself has entered our world with all its uncertainty, with all its fear and pain and suffering. He's entered this world in the person of the historical Jesus Christ. On Friday night, we're going to look at this some more. But just in case you're not free on Friday, let me say that God, the Almighty God, came down to earth in the person of his son Jesus to deal with the brokenness of the world and to hold out to every one of us an incredible hope of a perfect eternal future where there will be no sickness and no pain and no suffering and even no death. But at the same time, this Jesus also promised that he would actually be with us in the reality of our daily struggles, in all of our pain, in all of our doubts and uncertainties. He promises that he would be with us to comfort us, to strengthen us, and to walk with us through our daily experiences. So while we hold on to the hope of a perfect future, we trust our uncertain future to a loving, all-powerful God who's in control. And we can experience security in the person of Jesus, who said these words. In this world, he told his followers, in this world, you will face trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. In this world, you will face trouble. Yeah, right, Jesus. We see it every day. But Jesus says, take heart. I've overcome the world. And he's able to be with us always, right through all the mess. Now, look, if you want to talk more about this or ask some of those questions tonight, stay on for the question and answer session. Ask your questions and stay on for a further chat later. Why not chat to one of the Christians here who are part of the CU or the person who invited you to come? You could pick up a biography of Jesus and find out more about who he is. Copies of Mark Uncovered will be available. You could even commit to attending a Christianity Explored course in the future. But listen, take the chance to come to know this God. Trust your uncertain future to a loving God who holds the future in his hands. Thanks for listening. Look forward to your questions shortly.
So the most liked question so far is people are smashing that like button. So do Christians never feel anxious or uncertain? Does God tell them what the future will be like?
Excellent. I don't think there's any Christian I've met who would say I've never felt anxious. You know, I don't think anybody can say, no, I've never felt anxious. Let me come back to that first question, but deal with the second one first. This idea, does God tell you what the future is going to be like? Wow, it's a great phrased question. Going to look at it at two levels. Does God tell me what tomorrow is going to bring? No, he doesn't tell me. I don't have a, some sort of prophetic idea as to what's going to take place next week, next month, next year. He doesn't tell me at that level. But the ultimate future, he tells me exactly what that's going to be like. Because my ultimate future will be to be with him forever in a new earth, in a renewed earth, where there won't be sickness, pain, and suffering and all these things. So my ultimate future is very secure. My present future, though, I don't know any more, I don't really think, about what's happening next year than somebody who doesn't know God. The difference, though, that really helps address this issue of security and anxiety is that I know the God who holds that future. And I know that his plans for me are actually for my good, for my flourishing. His plans for me are for my good. Now, that's a challenging thing to say, because you look at stuff happening to people and think, hang on, how can that be for our good? But you see, the more you know this God and know him as a loving father who cares for you, the more you're able to trust and put your trust in the hands of this God, put your faith in this God. And whatever the future holds, you know that a loving father is the one who is allowing you to go through it and is going to bear you through that. So that helps me, going back to that first part of the question, that helps me when I do start to feel anxious, that I know that God holds my future. He tells me I don't need to be anxious. He tells me that he loves me, is on my side, wants the best for me. And so I learn to tell that to myself, and that's take away my anxiety. But yeah, we do feel anxious. You know, I was feeling anxious all week about doing this talk. So anxiety is a reasonable part of every human experience, but you don't have to wallow in your anxiety. It doesn't have to dominate your mind. It doesn't have to pull you down. You learn to lift your eyes to the God who knows the future.
Yeah. What are some practical ways we can find security in such a crazy world?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, two things I would suggest. One would be to hear what God's got to say. You know, we do that by looking at the Bible. We do that by spending time in prayer, to hear what God's got to say, to give us some comforting words, God. Not comforting words that aren't true, but give us some truth to hold on to keep my eyes fixed upon you. That would be one very, very major piece of advice. But the second, which might seem a lot more practical, but also a lot more challenging in our current days, is God's made us for relationships with each other. He's formed us for community. We're not meant to go through these challenging times alone. That wasn't the way he intended it. That's kind of why he put these Christians together in churches, so that they can support one another. That's why you all have a yearning for friends and community, because you want to walk through these things with others. So very practically, you make sure you invest as much as you're able to in good, life-giving, healthy relationships. Relationships that really encourage you, relationships that give you energy and life. You know, and I would say that even in COVID times, we've got to work really hard at doing that. In Zoom, on the phone, on WhatsApp, or whatever it is. But we need both, you see. We need the relationship with each other, but we also need a strong relationship with our Father in heaven, focusing upon the truths that he tells us, which actually ease our anxieties.
How would a faith in God that knows everything help someone if they suffer from depression? Did God know that they would face such hard times?
Yeah, that's a massively tough question. I mean, one of the challenges in these sorts of Q&A sessions, these sorts of talks, is that I have absolutely no idea what you're going through, you know, what you yourself are going through. And I don't want in any way to belittle the pain of what you're currently going through. If you're going through some really dark times, some depression, some mental health issue, then just to say, oh, trust in God and it'll be okay, that'd be trite. We all need help. We'll need professional help. We need to see the people who can really help us. But at the same time, you see, at the same time as knowing that God has provided a way through the medical profession to help us with our mental health struggles, to know that God does not abandon you in the midst of a mental health crisis is a precious truth. It might seem far from your reality right now, but God is with us in the deepest pain. God can be with us in the darkest night. And he does that through his people, often through other Christians, but he can also do that in a very powerful and supernatural way. I've suffered with mental health challenges myself. Had a very difficult episode about 12 years ago when I was very close to being signed off work with depression. And at that time, it's the time you least want to cry out to God, but it's the time you most need to cry out to God. And so whoever it is that's struggling with that, can I just say, cry out to this God who is powerful enough to meet you even in the midst of that dark time. But don't only do that. Reach out to friends and reach out for medical help should you need it.
I think it was, how does God care for suffering people? Is he seemingly detached to give us free will?
Yeah, brilliant question. And again, don't want to belittle the experience of anybody who's in the midst of suffering. How does God care for suffering people? He is present with us in the midst of our pain if we will allow him in. He would often provide help through people. You know, if you're a Christian listening to this tonight, one of the roles we have, and we're not that good at it, if I'm honest, We are there to be helping people who are struggling, helping people who are suffering, kind of a little bit like God's hands and feet, caring for a suffering world. It's no accident that in history, so many of the institutions, like the hospital system, were set up by Christians, were set up by those who are responding to the needs of the world with the love that God has given them. So God, in a very practical way, provides people to care for those who are suffering. That was, to me, one of the most tangible ways. I mean, I can talk about more mystical, spiritual presence of God with you, but it might not mean as much unless you know this God than the fact of people coming and caring, genuinely caring. And of course, it's not just Christians who do that. You know, there's plenty of other people who are caring. Let me tell you a little quick story about that. I talked about the earthquake in Chengdu and the horrific loss of life, much of which caused by the substandard buildings that have been put up. But one of the wonderful things that happened as a result of that earthquake, for the first time really in Chinese history, suddenly people from all over China were driving hundreds of miles to come and care for people that they didn't know. Now, you and I think that's quite a normal thing to do, because that's the kind of the culture in which we've grown up in, a Judeo-Christian culture of caring for the suffering. That isn't the norm in a Chinese Confucian worldview. Not that they're not caring people, don't misunderstand me, but they care very much for their own. You care for your own, your family, those close to you. Caring for strangers is a new concept for much Chinese traditional thought. And the reason it changed in 2008 is because the number of Christians in China today is rocketing. There may be 80 million Christians in China today. And you suddenly saw it in the mass number of Chinese Christians who were driving hundreds of miles with blankets and water. And after the NGOs all left and the relief agencies all left, after a month or so, the Christians were still there, setting up orphanages, caring for the kids who've been left behind. And so this is how God cares for those who are suffering, by sending his people in to help out. That's one of the most, the best answers I can have for a question that's challenging, as you say, James.
Even though you have the certainty of what you believe, do you still have doubts sometimes?
I mean, again, I'd be lying just to say, oh, never. I never have a doubt. But it's a question of the level of your doubt. What is it you're asking me that I'm doubting? I never doubt the existence of God. I never doubt the fact that he's good. I never doubt that his plans for me are good. But sometimes when, to be honest with you, when those things took place in the tsunami and the earthquake, that's my biggest question. That's where you could say some doubts might occur, because I really don't understand why 230,000 people die. I mean, I can understand why in the earthquake more died than should have done, because people who built the buildings had built them badly. But there's not a lot you can do about a massive tsunami sweeping across low-lying ground. And to be honest, I struggle to know why God would allow that to happen. So if that's a doubt, yeah, something like that I have some struggles with. But at the end of the day, I lift my eyes and say, well, Lord, there's so much I don't understand. Let me focus on what I do understand. And that is that you love me, you care for me, and you sent your son for me. I'm trying to hold on to what I do understand rather than worry about some of the other things that are kind of harder to grasp with. So what does it mean to cry out to God?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, brilliant. I mean, it could mean as simple as, what on earth are you doing, God? Just an actual physical crying out. There's a great historical story you'll find in the Old Testament, in the first part of the Bible, where the people of Israel are enslaved in Egypt and they cry out to God. You know, you can imagine what that's, well, maybe you can't imagine what that's like. Slavery is so horrific. The people of Israel are enslaved. They have no hope. Their lives are hard. They seem to have no meaning. Has God left them? Has God abandoned them? And they cry out to him. What do they cry? Probably, deliver us, like in the Prince of Egypt film. Deliver us. You know, save us. That's a great cry. But as you say, James, in this book, in the middle of the Bible, the book of Psalms, there's all sorts of different cries. Crying out to God for justice is a massive cry that we all want to echo, to cry out to God for justice. But listen, the critical thing is it's not crying out against God. It's crying to God, because God is powerful. God is almighty and able to intervene, as he did in the history of Israel by raising up a guy called Moses who brought them out of slavery. So we don't cry against God, we cry to God. God, I don't understand what's going on, but help. God, I don't understand why this is happening, but save me. God, I don't understand, but deliver me. I know you're good, but it's that sort of crying out. Your cries should reflect how you're genuinely feeling, because there's no point pretending to God, because he knows exactly what you're feeling anyway. Cry in a genuine way, but cry to him rather than crying against him, I would say.